Pleased to be here in Princeton with some of New Jersey's most outspoken advocates for women's rights, the well-being of our families, and the LGBTQ community. We're here to talk about Republican Bob Hugin's lifelong record of working to keep women down, to shut the LGBTQ Americans out, which unfortunately began here at Princeton. There are those of us who can look back at our careers with pride, knowing that we stood on the right side of history when it comes to women's rights and civil rights. And then there are those people like Bob Hugin who stood on the wrong side of history time and time again. I spent my college years serving on my local school board and working to make sure that every student had a fair shot at success. Bob Hugin spent his college years speaking out against the rights of gay and lesbian students. When I was a state legislator, I wrote New Jersey's first bias crime law, which included crimes motivated by hate for one's sexual orientation. Bob Hugin was mounting a legal challenge to keep women out of the supper club he led during his time at Princeton. When I was fighting to pass the Affordable Care Act and require insurance companies to cover birth control free of charge, Bob Hugin was donating to right-wing politicians like Paul Ryan, Chris Christie, and Scott Garrett, who voted year after year to defund Planned Parenthood and roll back reproductive rights. When I was fighting to ban discrimination in the workplace against LGBTQ employees and secure equal pay for equal work for women, Bob Hugin was spending $500,000 on the Heritage Foundation's right-wing, anti-women, anti-LGBTQ, anti-worker agenda. When I was fighting to stop Republicans from taking health care coverage away from 1 million New Jerseyans, Bob Hugin was cheerleading efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act and once again allow insurance companies to charge higher premiums to women just because they were women. And when I was working to elect our first woman president, Bob Hugin was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars getting an unabashed misogynist who bragged about sexually assaulting women elected to the White House. There is a big difference. Time and time again, Bob Hugin stood on the wrong side of history, all the way back to his college years leading Princeton's Tiger Eating Club. In this role, Bob Hugin could have led by example. He could have been a voice for progress and inclusion. Instead, Bob Hugin stood in the way of the LGBTQ progress and worked to preserve Princeton's Tiger Inn as a haven for straight, wealthy white male privilege, even making threatening comments about how a gay member wouldn't last long in his club. Not only did Hugin oppose the creation of the Gay Alliance on campus, he ran a petition drive against a proposal to add protections for LGBTQ students to Princeton's anti-discrimination policy. Bob Hugin says his views evolved after college, but the facts tell us a very different story. He was a full-grown married man when he launched his misogynistic crusade in 1992 to keep women out of his good old boys club. I remember what a victory it was when the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled in favor of women courageously seeking access to Princeton's exclusively male dining clubs. It was another great step forward for New Jersey's women's movement in the spirit of Alice Paul, a suffragette who helped pass the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. But what I saw as a victory for equality, Bob Hugin saw as a travesty. He called it, quote, politically correct fascism. He was a full-grown adult with a wife and children at the time, and yet he was so outraged by the inclusion of women in his good old boys club that he challenged the landmark ruling all the way in the federal court. Now, I remember how Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. Well, Bob Hugin tried to bend the arc backwards for New Jersey's women, and we're not going to let him go to the United States Senate and do that. We're all very glad that the courts rejected Hugin's sexist legal battle. But as the saying goes, a tiger never changes his stripes. It's no surprise then after getting rich as a greedy drug company CEO, Hugin then donated $500,000 to the Heritage Foundation, which has spearheaded right-wing efforts to rig our courts against everyday Americans. As we speak, there is a debate in the United States Senate over the credible sexual allegations made against President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh. Professor Ford deserves to be heard as these allegations, regardless of when they occurred, raise even more questions about Kavanaugh's character and ability to serve. Likewise, I believe Hugin, who has attempted to downplay his own actions, should have to answer for the hateful, misogynistic views he spouted 35 years ago. I know what I was doing 35 years ago. I've spent my entire life fighting for equal rights for every American, in education, in our economy, in our courts, and so on. That's why I have been and am the sponsor of the Equal Rights Amendment in the United States Senate so that we can ensure, guaranteed in the Constitution, that that is a reality. New Jerseyans cannot trust Bob Hugin to stand up against the Trump administration's assaults on the rights of women, the LGBTQ Americans, workers, and voters. Hugin has had many opportunities to take a principled stand against Trump over the past 2 years. He failed to do so. Hugin stood with Trump when he bragged about sexually assaulting women. Hugin stood with Trump when he said that abortion should be criminalized and women should be punished. Hugin stood with Trump when he nominated anti-choice judges like Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. I voted against Neil Gorsuch, and I will vote against Brett Kavanaugh as well. Josie, my opponent supports both. He supports both, but he's a different type of Republican somehow. New Jerseyans don't need someone who will stand with Donald Trump. They need someone who will stand up to Donald Trump. Someone who will hold this administration accountable for its abuses and fight Trump's efforts to remake the court in his own right-wing image. Bob Hugin will literally say anything, in order to distract New Jerseyans from his record. But as advocates for equal rights and justice, we refuse to let him get away with it. Let me call upon some of those who have joined with me, who I admire their leadership in so many different ways, who want to speak out today as well, starting with Elizabeth Meyer, the founder and lead organizer of the New Jersey Women's March.